हेलो। हाँ जी, सुन पा रहे हैं आप? मैंने सैटरडे को कहा था एक सीरियस कॉन्वर्सेशन करूंगा और संडे को एक लाइट कॉन्वर्सेशन या स्टोरी सेशन करूंगा, जो भी आप सब कहेंगे। अभिजीत इज जस्ट ज्वाइनिंग एंड ही इज जॉइंड। यस, लेट मी ऐड हिम टू द स्ट्रीम। अभिजीत, हाय।
Hello.
स्वागतम, स्वागतम, स्वागतम. So all the viewers of the channel, in the beginning of the channel, Abhijit is a dear friend of mine, and he was very kind, and he came 3-4 times. And then I did not have conversations for a long while, for 6-8 months, as you know. And I have restarted the conversations in 2021. And Abhijit is back with his views. We were talking that time about the Indian subcontinent, India, China हो रहा था जून में. हम उसकी बात कर रहे थे. Now we are talking US, which is much more serious. And I don't know, first off, Abhijit, how have you been?
सब माता कटोरी देवी की श्रेय है. उनके श्रेय से मैं बहुत अच्छा हो रहा हूँ, थोड़ा मोटा भी हो रहा हूँ, क्योंकि जब देती हैं छप्पड़ फाड़ के देती हैं.
मैंने ये इंग्लिश चैनल पे स्ट्रीम कर रहा था, बट आप अगर हिंदी में बात करने में कंफर्टेबल हैं तो हम हिंदी में बात करेंगे.
हाँ, मैं इंग्लिश में बात करूंगा.
अब इंग्लिश, as you don't follow any binary in every way.
I'm gender fluid, I'm cultural fluid.
Cultural fluid. So first question off, did you expect, even though it's an old question now, did you expect Biden win, or were you thinking Trump would win? What was your call?
So I genuinely did not expect a Biden win, though all my friends in America were saying, dude, you don't realize how the Democrats are mobilizing out here. So I accept the Biden win. I accept that there is thoda moda fraud here and there, not fraud to the extent that it changed the complete course of the elections. Except in the battleground states, yes, it's open to interpretation because the victory margins are sliver thin, like 30,000-40,000 votes, which is nothing realistically. But Biden won. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Why, do this thing? Biden won, and I got it wrong. I got the Modi, to be fair, I also got Modi 2019 wrong. Remember, I expected the BJP to only get about 140, 150 seats, and they got 303.
I didn't know that.
I never claimed to be a cephalogist. Remember that. I'm quite happy putting out my opinions of who's going to win purely as a entertainment value and a thing of my belief, my gut feeling as well. But it's not, and it's based on conversations, which can sometimes get completely self-referential and wishful thinking as well. Yeah.
But that's very admirable, because most people will not admit that they didn't expect Modi to. In fact, I didn't remember that you had said that. Now that you say, I remember, because I had tweeted also that I felt the PM is getting 300 plus, because the enthusiasm level when I was traveling was very, very high. But anyways, but it's nice that you are very upfront about it and admit that what you know, you really know, where you apply your mind, and rest is fun and games for you. So I will come to what you apply your mind to and what is your serious expertise in. I read an article, in fact, you tweeted that article, and I read it, and then I thought I'll do this conversation with you, which says that Biden had two members, one Sonal Shah and one Amit Jani, working on his president's campaign team. But and usually the people who work on the campaign team and are in decent position get absorbed in some role or the other. He did not include them in his team as of now, because they have so-called RSS or BJP links. That made me ask this question, and that's why I'm starting this debate. Do you think that is actually playing out there, or do you think that is potentially something that can play out there?
It is very much playing out there. I know this from several sources, friends of mine as well, who are facing the heat just the way, for example, Tulsi Gabbard faces the heat for being Hindu. You can have a Hindu name and brown skin, which will win you brownie points, but unless you conform to the national dogma or the democratic dogma, in the sense that political Islam is great, political Hinduism is Nazism and, the bastard child of Hitler, you will not only will you not get a favorable hearing, it is your own people that will bring you down. Because remember, in this case, it was several Hindu American organizations that campaigned against these two people.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
19 separate Indian American and Hindu American organizations that campaigned against these two. And
Hmm.
I know this firsthand because I know some of the people that did the campaigning. I
Hmm.
don't like them, but I know what they were up to, because our mutual friends were telling me what they were up to. And it is a very clear and real danger, which is why I have been saying for a very, very long time. This whole I understand H-1B visas are great for America, but what do they do for India except brain drain? And we need to keep a very, very close watch on these people and their families in India from these 19 different organizations, because they are the ones that are basically wreaking havoc with your foreign policy in America. There needs to be some kind of coercion, leverage, and collective punishment.
Punishment, you say?
Absolutely. If they are going to punish people for their political beliefs in America, then you have to punish people for their American political beliefs in India.
Do you think that's realistic? It's not an that's no matter how one
Care.
wants to think. It's not an
You
equal
don't
relationship.
have don't have the economic heft, you don't have the military heft to do anything else. Your diplomacy in the last 6 years has been absolutely pathetic in terms of putting across an Indian point of view to the West. Ultimately, it turns out the COVID vaccine, Adar Poonawalla and India Biotech,
Okay.
have done more for your foreign policy than the government has done.
Why do you
So,
say that?
uh, it's just the reality of it. It's the first time in 6 years that the New York Times has run a nice story about you. And imagine if Woke Central is running a nice story about you and it's only because of your COVID vaccine. I mean, it was like a bittersweet story. They weren't very happy that they had to do it, but karna hi pada.
Mhm.
Okay. But there's lots of reasons for it. You look at the Delhi riots. A lot of people that I know in within the capital, within that whole system, congressional aides and things like that, uh,
Mm.
and a few Congress people that I know, they were telling me, what do we have to go on? Your government never put out a formal defense of its position on the Delhi riots. The foreign minister never came and said anything. There was no private representation given to private briefing given to our diplomats out there. So our diplomats had to rely entirely on what the press was saying. What else are we meant to conclude from all of this?
You think our diplomats did not make an effort of putting the government side of the story, lobbying which is there? You think we failed in all that? Because I don't know all that. You're right, media carries certain stories, but you think on ground, one-to-one meetings, briefings, putting our position
There were
across,
none.
documents, that didn't happen?
There were none. There was no off the record briefing, private briefing of diplomats in Delhi at that point of time. None after that. Even CAA, there was no in depth briefing. There have been a lot of things like this. Even on Kashmir, there was a lot of spade work done beforehand, just like as it was before Balakot as well. I know this for a fact. The issue is that on things like CAA and NRC, it wasn't done. On the Delhi riots, it wasn't done. And these would be diplomats and Congress people who admit that they can't trust the media, that very frequently the media narrative of their own media runs contrary to the reality as their embassy in Delhi sees it. Because embassies are much more scholarly and they see through journalists and their agendas and things like that. Some of them don't, but a lot of them do. So it always shows up in the official record, the correct version of events or the government version of events. In this case, there was none. So what do you do?
So, but when we were doing it, as you say, for Article 370, we did a lot of groundwork, and for Balakot, you say we did a lot of groundwork. Why did that same thing not carry forward in this? Why did that not
I
happen? Because
honestly
Balakot
don't
happened
know.
before.
I honestly don't know, but you see, the policy variability is usually a big issue. I think it was seen as because Delhi riots have no international locus standi. CA and RC has no international locus standi, but an attack on Pakistan is fundamentally foreign relations. Kashmir, because it involves Pakistan and the decades-long internationalized conflict, has a foreign relations angle to it. I suspect it was more a case of siloization. But for me, all decisions, there is no such thing as foreign policy. I think people forget that. You have a whole set of domestic policies projected abroad, which you call foreign policy, but you don't actually have something called foreign policy. It's only domestic policy and all that it imposes on you to do abroad. So I am always against that kind of siloization. I'm always that every single thing you do, you need to sit down and have a very, very rigorous government to government debriefing done.
But Abhijit, won't that open up Pandora's box? Because, as you put it, the government's view might be that Kashmir is, whether we like it or not, we will never admit it's an international issue, but it has international ramifications which are established.
Yeah.
Balakot definitely is an international issue because we went to Pakistan proper. But if you start briefing foreign governments too much on a domestic legislation, which is operating only in the territory of India, which is what CAA was, then that is akin to US explaining Black Lives Matter movement or the capital, whatever happened there movement. And would that not be a very slippery slope? Then would you not have to explain farmers' protest? Would you not have to explain something you do in Tamil Nadu? That would open up Pandora's box if you start explaining and briefing foreign ambassadors on purely domestic legislation.
Informing your friends of the government position and the basis of policy is very different from inviting interference by them. Here, when they're only getting one point of view, you push them to a wall where they have to take a political position against you. So even if you are not briefing them, your enemies in the press are briefing them. So it is more a case of damage control or preemption. And these things are better not left to principle. They are left to a whole set of tactics that evolve over a period of time.
But Abhijit, in this case, still, at least it was a President Trump government whose views on political Islam, as you say, were something which were, I think, right of even the Indian government's views, right? Now that the government has changed, how do you see rules of CAA being framed? Or you think that is just going to be, for those who do not know, when an act comes, it's a law, and then you have to make these rules in simple language to implement that law. So CA was just the law. We had to make all these rules to implement, execute. अब जो छोटा जो बाबू है वो कैसे काम करेगा, क्या rights हैं, वो सब वो नहीं हुआ है. So do you, and without that the law is only paper. So do you see that happening now, rules being framed, or you think that is something which in the current environment, change of government will not happen?
The CA NRC process is dead, boss. What was the last time you heard about any rules or implementation? Even Assam, what we were hearing about the sequestration camps and things like that, the gentleman who had served, which was a complete disgrace, a gentleman who had served in the Indian army being thrown into one of these sequestration camps. Have you heard anything for the last year or so? Nothing, no? There's been no news item about it. It's dead. Apparently, from what the Bangladeshis are telling me, that the government has given them assurances it's dead. It's never going to be carried through.
So what was all the process about, all the violence that Delhi saw? That was...
it was political mobilization, I suspect.
But that also didn't happen. Delhi voted on its...
Like we can now, with the benefit of hindsight, agree that 370 was also in a sense tamasha. Because see, when you have a conflict economy, you can read, to understand a conflict economy, I'd suggest you read up about Kosovo and Bosnia, and the Bosnian economy when it was under sanctions, and also the Iranian economy under sanctions. What happens is when you have a conflict economy, all normal economic rules get suspended and every economic activity starts gaining an incentive from conflict. Okay, this has happened very significantly in Kashmir. Almost 65 to 70% of the population, their income and their livelihoods are dependent on the continuation of the conflict. Okay. Part of building peace is not just देखो एक legislation करोगे, it's a good start, but then there is all the follow up that you have to do. Deconflicting the economy was one of the main things we were looking at, and that has not happened. Let me give you an example. You still go there, and one of the things you see is medical education or architectural education in Bangladesh. Most of the Kashmiri newspapers will carry ads for that. The Bangladesh route is the biggest black market money laundering route that you have into Kashmir at the moment. Okay, not cracked down on at all. The cement mafia, and I was hoping, because I think Amit Shah ji raised this in Parliament on cement prices being higher. I thought they had understood that cement is one more of those very important areas where a lot of
Let me
illegality
just
exists.
let me change the Wi-Fi 1 second. It's your voice is breaking, I think. 1 second. Yep. Now it's good.
Ooh,
Okay, Abhijit. Okay, 1 second.
Can you see me? Can you
He's
hear
just
me?
joining. I just changed my Wi-Fi. Or maybe I shouldn't have changed it. No, but it's okay now. You'll have to rejoin, Abhijit. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Let me just call him. ये सारा हम नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पे इसलिए ही बात कर रहे हैं. रीजॉइन बोल देता हूँ उसको 1 सेकंड. He will have to rejoin 1 second. Oops. Oh. Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear
Can you
me?
see me now? Is it better? Yeah, I can hear
Perfect.
you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. So cement. I was hoping they would crack down on that industry. They haven't. A lot of what I know are sources of funding of militants have not been cut off. The schemes that were introduced to so if I want to explain the PDP, the Hizbul Mujahideen, and the Jamaat-e-Islami to you, you have to look at the Irish example. Sinn Féin was the political wing, the Irish Republican Army was the terror wing. In Kashmir, what it is it's three. It's Hizbul Mujahideen is the terror wing, the Jamaat-e-Islami is the Buddhijeevi wing, and the PDP is the political wing. Because Mr. Mufti, he realized very early on that he wasn't going to win any elections with Sheikh Abdullah and Farooq Abdullah being around. So he sort of voluntarily became the voice of the Jamaat-e-Islami and therefore the Hizbul Mujahideen. Okay, now this is the way that functions. You have done nothing whatsoever to curtail that. There was huge intakes of Jamaat-e-Islami teachers into the education system, which spurred on the radicalization. You haven't sacked them. Okay, the entire system of state patronage out there hasn't been done away with. Most of the malls, in fact, in Srinagar are owned by former militant leaders. Why? Because Raw and IB used to pay them money to come over. And after they'd come over, they'd continue to play both sides for money. And if you acted too smart by half, Pakistan would kill you. India won't kill you, but the Pakistanis would kill you. Okay? So, for example, the Mirwai's father who was assassinated, he is buried alongside his assassin. Because the father was acting too smart by half, so Pakistan killed him off. So Pakistan understands so Indian state only gives carrots, the Pakistani state only gives sticks. And guess who wins? Because like a famous American general said, when you've got somebody by the balls, their hearts and minds will follow. We have not done the follow-up necessary at all, and that is particularly worrying for me.
But Abhijit, on 370, in fact, last time also we had a bit of a discussion, but I will shift to US now because we had this. I think the government did take a historic step, and I am still willing to give them a lot of latitude because very few people expected this move. I, for one, did some tweets and YouTube video when that parliament was being, the rumors were floating at that time. It wasn't very clear. I did feel because that is what I felt is the only big move they can do on national security. And The Prime Minister does do big moves. Implementation and how you follow up are obviously matter of detail, where we all discuss. But the very step of the concept, I'm saying concept level, that we have a separate land जहाँ पे हमारा separate झंडा है, separate rules हैं, separate सब कुछ है, that
So,
allows.
Ishkaran, I'm not taking away from the momentousness of that decision. But understand, policy is not one point in time. Policy is a continuum of actions and continuing actions throughout that add up to policy. Policy is not legislation. The abrogation of Article 370 was legislation. Policy is a living, breathing thing that happens on a daily basis. They took legislation, they haven't taken a policy decision.
I got you. What I'm saying, I think I'm willing to give them time on that because I do think they will follow.
No, I'm not because every life lost is essentially a result now of governmental lethargy.
Okay, but as I said, on this we will differ a bit. But on because see what sort of delimitation they do. To me, that is a big benchmark because long-term solution will only happen with a smart delimitation, where you do change the voting systems a bit or voting. Let's just put it.
Understand, a lot of Hindus there as well, including in Jammu, are incentivized in the conflict economy. Don't forget that. It overwhelmingly favors Muslims. So, this belief that somehow delimitation, again, please do not confuse legislation with policy. Delimitation is a legislative move. It's not going to change the fundamental conflicted nature of the Kashmiri economy, which incentivizes the continuation of terrorism. Two completely different things.
70 years that conflict economy took to build. We have to give them 2-3 years on this.
No. The conflict economy happened within the space of 2 to 3 years. That is the nature of a conflict economy. It starts off in 89, and you can say by about 95, it was in full flow. It got solidified in 1995. You can maybe stretch it up to 97, but it did not take that long. The conflict economy.
Even with your timelines, I would say 89 to 2019, right? It still has been there for good 30 years. So that's, as in, it's a matter of perception. We won't come to a conclusion on this. We have to give government 2-3 years to untie or cut the guardian knot, and let's see. I'm at least optimistic. I'm not a very optimistic person on a lot of things, but at least on 370, I'm still optimistic that they will do it.
2 साल हो गए. ये मार्च 2019 को हुआ था. 2 साल हो गए. March 2019 to March 2020, March 2020 to March 2021. But then March 20 या May, ठीक है, हाँ, May में हुआ था ना, May में हुआ था, हाँ. So May 2019 to May 2020, May 2020.
May हुआ था. ये तो सरकार आई थी. August
में हुआ था. May, June, July, August. You're correct. So August to August 2020, August to August 2021, August 2022, we will have this chat again. Pen the date.
Done. August 2022, we have a date, but I do believe 1 year was COVID. So, but anyways, I will still go with 2022 because I do believe that this will not be a half-baked move. That is my, whatever I have talked with people, that is my feedback. This won't be a half-baked move because they would not leave it at a situation that it can be partially or wholly reversed. I don't think so. They would leave it at that, but let's see. Time will be out. Now on to Biden, which is what I wanted to. So how do you see this Biden coming in and RSS or BJP links appearing to become making you person non grata? And Kamala Harris, people know what her viewpoints are unless she becomes a statesman and as a vice president becomes a very different beast, which usually doesn't happen. So how do you see it playing out? And if you remember, Obama, even when he had come, in 15, I think, his views had given a lot of hope to the NDTV crowd. And today, I just want to share this of NDTV. People should know. Pranoy Roy, the head, father, philosopher, friend, guide of everything left in India, tweets this on Biden taking the stage. Ex-President Trump. Woo hoo. So I think they are feeling very happy in India. Do they have a reason to be happy?
They do, and I'll tell you why. The Obama presidency was a lot about talk, and and that's what liberals really look to. For them, speech is the most important, actions are secondary. And in my experience, that's particularly dangerous because having traveled extensively in Central Asia, I can tell you the Soviets were the loudest about minority rights and the protection of indigenous cultures, and nobody did more to destroy the cultural identity of the five stans, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, than the Soviet Union did. Even China hasn't been able to achieve in Xinjiang what the Soviet Union managed in those five stans. They deracinated them, deculturalized them, turned them into, essentially Turkic Europeans in that sense, to an extent that even Kemal Ataturk didn't manage to do in Turkey proper. So speech worries me, but that is what the liberals focus on. Now, you look at Obama's record. He started off this idea of a G2, which was essentially a global duopoly like the USA, USSR with China. And when the Chinese weren't interested, then he came up with the Asian pivot. So he was willing to sell India down the shaft, India, by the way. Then he comes up with the idea of the Asian pivot, which the idiots used to go, they used to sit and orgasm about it without realizing that the Asian pivot, American forces actually moved 1,000 kilometers away from China, not 1,000 kilometers closer to China. They moved from the first island chain to the second island chain. Not 1,000, but about 570 to 800 kilometers, depending on where you measure it. Okay. And everybody was going gaga over it. Now, when Obama left office, did you see China ever or Chinese news agencies tweet good riddance and put sanctions on Obama officials? No. They've put sanctions on Trump officials, and Xinhua actually tweeted good riddance, which tells you who was pro-China and who was compromised to China and who was anti-China. And this applies to a whole range of things because Obama was particularly insidious in the Indian context. Okay, they would keep raising crap like this, keep supporting. They created the whole ecosystem that has supported all your wokes in America. Now he says, he's officially come out and many times talked against wokes in my language, but nobody did more to foster the woke movement than Obama did personally, which is a lot of the funding networks and ecosystems of the entire left wing that you see in India today. Okay, at the society level, at the NGO level, and so on and so forth. So there is a fundamental danger out here, and the Democrats are way better at this. Just like you see, even now, after being out of power for 6 years, the Congress may keep losing elections, but in the global narrative battle, the Congress rings around the BJP. Okay, if you look at India's international image, it runs rings around the BJP any day, every day, because they're the type of people who can, swig a champagne or a cognac and have great fireside intellectual conversations with you, that can write great op-eds in the New York Times or Washington Post and change your mind about it. It's the same thing that you see in America as well. This is a fundamental issue out here. Biden is going to be, I am just hoping, because Biden is not ill-disposed towards India, but and there is also an argument to be made about the personalization of policy, that mature democracies do not personalize policy, and yet there is a lot of history to show that policy does get personalized. For example, Netanyahu pissed off both Bill Clinton and he pissed off Obama, and both Clinton came down on him, but not so hard. Obama came down on Netanyahu extremely hard. They stopped sharing intelligence with the Israelis. They started screwing the Israelis over in many different ways. They were ready to abandon both the Saudis and the Israelis to seek a nuclear accord, just to get Iran to commit to a commitment it had already made that it would not make nuclear weapons. They were willing to dump Israel and Saudi Arabia. Too
Did
old
you
and
see that
trusted.
change of ambassador to Israel thing which happened for 10 minutes or 20 minutes?
I don't know. I mean, we can put it down to, I guess, an over enthusiastic staffer or whatever. But it changed back.
For
But
those
that
who do
shows
not
you kind of.
know, if you can just tell people who do you think it was a staffer thing, over enthusiastic staffer, not a
I do think
policy
it was
decision?
a staffer. I do think it was a staffer, because what happened was it was said ambassador to Israel, and then it got changed to Israeli ambassador to the Palestinian, to Israel, the Palestinian territories, and the West Bank, or something like that. And then when the mistake was noticed and it became a huge brouhaha on Twitter, it changed back again. So it shows you the kind of people that infest the Biden administration, and that is not going to be good for you. Because, see, policies may be neutral, but people who implement those policies are not neutral. And I can tell you with this government, what I'm seeing is there are a lot of people out to screw you over.
No, but Abhijit, and this absolutely. See, Trump and Biden are two very different beasts. There is no comparison between them. In fact, 2015 or 14, nobody thought China and US had a potential issue, conflict, trade war brewing. Nobody. I don't think so. Anybody senior enough at a public platform had ever said China is the rival. Or at least it was not in some policy paper. Think tanks may have said it. But Trump, like a huge he had that ability to jump like King Kong into issues and brought China to the forefront. Do you think that has seeped into the people's mind? He may have lost the election, but let's be very real, he got 74 million votes, and he is a cult like person. Whether you like him, dislike him, his people will go with him, and they are almost 47-48% of people. And if it was a split democracy like India, 3-4 candidates, he would have won, because his voters are not voting anybody else. Anybody else's voter may all come behind one person, or they may split. Right? But we have to
Issue
be
is how they're going to do it. Because now both Congress and Senate are controlled by the Democrats. The presidency is controlled by the Democrats. So their attempt at legislative counters to pro-China policies is gone. You have a president now who's completely compromised through his son to the Chinese, possibly personally also compromised to the Chinese. We don't know what kind of compromat the Chinese have on him. And this is very serious, by the way. And the second part of this is China also has its fingers very deep inside the American pie across the broad political spectrum. See, George Soros, he's very interested in democracy promotion in India and the former Soviet Union. Why doesn't he ever do democracy promotion in China? Have you ever seen any George Soros democracy promotion in China? कुछ नहीं होता है ना उधर, क्यों?
billionaires disappear in China.
Billionaires disappear in China. This is what happens. This is the reality of China. And China is so deep. Their ability to corrupt is so great. You now have a Chinese puppet as the president of America.
You believe
What,
you go that far as saying he's a
I would
Chinese
say he's a
puppet?
puppet. Okay, maybe that was hyperbole, but his son is definitely compromised. And ultimately, this depends on what he considers more important, being the president of America or being the father of Hunter Biden.
No, but Abhijit, my question wasn't on the establishment being pro-China. They were pro-China till Trump came in, right? I am saying in public, I'm talking about the public. Can they be so fully pro-China?
They were verbally anti-China. In actions, they were China indifferent. To the extent that China managed to gain a lot of ground.
But now that it has been made visible, you think it will still continue? They would subtly be pro-China, or you think Trump has managed to poison the well of public opinion enough against China that you cannot now be pro-China?
No, he has not. Because remember, if 74 million people voted for Trump, 80 million voted for Biden. So there are as many people who believe, there are more people who believe that the China compromise is disinformation, Russian disinformation, than there are that believe in the China threat story, number one. Number two, you basically have see where China has become a clear and visible threat to America, the kind of stupidity you see in America is what you see the non alignment lobby in Delhi do. That even after they kill 22 of our troops, you are not willing to call them. The foreign secretary doesn't even, the foreign minister doesn't even mention them by name when putting out a statement. Hmm? So you are seeing the same thing. Americans used to keep making fun of us. China's your threat. China's your threat. Why aren't you naming China as the threat? It's very curious because I'm waiting to just after COVID restrictions go back to the track 2 circuit in America and tell them, look, you went on telling us, why aren't you aligning against us, against China and la di da. Today, you guys aren't even willing to acknowledge China as the threat. So what are you giving us lectures about? You say China is a strategic competitor, but Russia is the strategic adversary. And you have to be a serious prize idiot to think that a country with 1/3 your population and 1/14 your economy is the enemy, whereas the country with 3-4 times your population and almost about what, half to 2/3 your economy is a competitor, is a friendly competitor.
That's true. That's true.
So you see that stupidification. Do you remember that American comedy movie that came out, Idiotocracy or something like that? It's where idiots have taken over the administration of the United States. And because they all feel re-energized drinking energy drinks, instead of putting water into the fields, they start putting energy drink into the fields, and it starts killing the crops. You're essentially looking at a country that has become, and in a sense, they are right. The biggest enemy of America today is not China, it is America itself.
That's true. Russia, I do not think so. But anybody, as you said, when your economy is 1/14th, when your economy could not compete in Reagan era and you had to basically bankrupt yourself into competing, there is no way you can compete now. It's a no-brainer that they are a problem to you. But the thing I want to ask you is in Indian context. India makes a lot of this. In fact, Rahul Gandhi recently did that press conference in which he said the prime minister went there and said, "Ab ki baar Trump sarkar," and this is going to come back to hit him. Does US also believe, as per your sources, that the prime minister did do "Ab ki baar Trump ki sarkar"? And are they going to hit back because he did do that? If they believe that,
they will. There are a lot of people that I know personally in the current administration who did take that particular statement very badly. At the same time, it is one of the few things that Modi and Jaishankar did that I find hard to criticize. You know why? Because it was the first time in a very long time that an Indian leader actually took a gamble. And gambles can either pay off big or you can lose big. But you can't. This is what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita: "Karmanyevadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana." He did what was right at that point of time because the Democrats had become vitriolically anti-Indian by that point of time. So it was a threat across the Democratic bow saying, behave or else. Of course, it kind of misfired because they went even more ape shit with Ilhan Omar running her little kangaroo court in Congress, where Aarti Tikku and Sunanda Vashisht testified and things like that. And that ugly buffalo, what's her name? Pramila Jaipal. She also had some things to say. And Jaishankar very rightly snubbed her and refused to meet with her. There is the category of mistakes where you could not foresee negative consequences or where the opportunity cost was worth it. And I think this was one of the things that they did right. And you can't blame politicians for doing things that backfired, not because there wasn't enough thought given to it, but because who could have predicted COVID was going to happen, Ishkaran? COVID really screwed that economy. That economy was booming till COVID hit. And the same people that were accusing Trump of not shutting down the economy, today they are in a huge hurry to open up the economy in spite of COVID. So there was a lot of things that couldn't have been at that time. That was the right decision to have made. It didn't pan
It's
out,
a
but
very
yes, I do
unusual
think there are
decision
lots of
to
people
take,
within the Biden administration that do have the knives out for us.
but it is a very unusual move. Let me put it like that. For a prime minister to take sides in a domestic policy of not a weak nation, a nation which is probably the only superpower, or there are two superpowers, or whatever you put it, however you want to put it. Uh, and do you think it was you, as per you, it was a good move? It was a bold move to make, and right move at that time. Hindsight is, perfect. But do you feel the consequences of that would be something which are going to be grave, or you think it is something which will slide by?
It will be limited. It will not be grave. And I'll tell you why it's limited. You look at what's happening with CATSA sanctions on India's S-400 purchase, the anti-aircraft missile that we're buying from Russia. Basically, America realizes if it imposes CATSA sanctions on us because of the S-400 purchase, it is basically proving every JNU professor who has agitated against improvement of ties with America right. It is proving the non-alignment lobby right. It will remove it's basically throwing every analyst in India who had advocated for stronger ties with America under the truck. They will have abandoned not just their most important proponents out in India, they would have also abandoned their own foreign policy goals and things like that. So, see, there are still structural limits to what the Americans can do. Hard structural limits. You might see a more number of statements that are kind of semi hostile to India, but in terms of actions, they will be limited.
You do not think it is going to go from the usual freedom of religion council or whatever they have, which keeps on making statements, and now I presume they will make statements very frequently.
They'll keep making
Nothing
statements. That's
wrong.
about
Nothing.
कुत्ते
Not nothing
भौंकते रहेंगे.
concrete.
हाँ, कुत्ते
Nothing.
भौंकते रहेंगे.
Nothing concrete.
मेरे
That's why I say
मेरे
I
मेरे को
anyway.
कुत्ते मेरे को कुत्ते बहुत अच्छे लगते हैं, तो ऐसे बोलते हैं कि ये बंदर बनाना खा. यार मेरे को बंदर भी अच्छे लगते हैं, तो ठीक है. नॉटी बंदर बनाना खा के उसका छिलका रोड पे फेंकते रहेंगे ताकि आप उस पे फिसलो.
So you think that is all it will be? It will not be concrete actions against India, sanctions, or
Correct.
you know,
Correct.
these.
And because the Democrats are dumb enough, they will fall for it and say, see, Biden is finally taking on human rights in India. He's finally taking on the rights of Kashmiris into India. And my real worry in all of this is that Indian Twitterati and people like that, they actually take these statements. There's nothing to get the New York Times and not New York Times, the Washington Post more hits than a Rana Ayub column. She's too much of a joke. I know people in Washington Post who tell me she's so much of a joke to be printed in the paper. She never gets printed in the paper. It's an online blog.
Oh, she's not okay.
She's never printed in the paper. She only has an online blog. Okay. And she gets which is why nobody ever puts up a photo. आज के Washington Post में देखो राना आयुब का column. Have you ever seen anybody put up a photo कि उसके इसमें column है करके? नहीं. So
I didn't follow her, so I wouldn't know. But yeah, I take your point. They would have made it viral. Yeah, I take your point.
These things like the Council on Religious Freedoms and things like that, they get the entire rank and file highly agitated. And unfortunately, they have also the tendency of agitating our foreign minister. Because when last time they passed that statement on the CAA NRC, the foreign minister then came out and said, I'm not giving you visas to come here. I'm going to cancel your visas. Now, my issue is for a foreign minister who had never done a public defense of the acts, who hadn't even done a private defense of the acts, what was he getting so agitated about? Because the CF, the Council on Foreign, I keep religious freedoms. I keep confusing between CFR, which is a think tank, and RF, which is a state body. He denied them visas. And the thing is, you never defended it in in private or public. They go by press reports. And then when they throw a tantrum, you then go berserk. That is policy immaturity. तुम अपना काम मत करो और तुम अपनी काम चोरी की वजह से किसी और पे किसी और को ब्लेम करो.
Okay, and but see, we are in a very sensitive situation. Vis-a-vis Pakistan, it's perpetually there, and with China, last 3-4 years, whatever be the, I'm not getting into the long debate on what the ground position is. Maybe some other day. There is enough tension and pressure in relationships with China, and hot tension and pressure with China now. Maybe Arunachal also. That whatever that village story which is floating around. So Arunachal, it is there in the other border. So do you think at this time a Trump government was at least mentally support, and this government will of Biden will keep hands off, not our issue, or you think it's the same policy they will have to follow?
It was mentally and tangibly also support. Generally, these days, Republican governments are. And if you want an example of that, you need to look at how Obama threw Japan under the truck over the Diaoyu Senkaku Islands. So Diaoyu, the Japanese is Diaoyu Senkaku, and the Chinese word for it is Diaoyu. It's islands that Japan controls, but China claims. And under Obama, what happened was China and Japan got into a really nasty situation about it. And Obama issued this statement saying, our mutual defense treaty with Japan only extends to if Japan gets attacked. Essentially indicating that if China took it over without attacking it or causing casualties, Japan couldn't expect defense of its territorial claims. Okay. He's done a lot of shit like this, by the way. Obama keeps getting lauded as this great foreign policy genius. But as Trump proved John Kerry to be one of the biggest diplomatic idiots in the last 500 years, Obama was nothing short of that. Not much short of that. As opposed to Trump, who was like totally gung-ho about supporting his allies, old allies, but also about supporting India as well during the entire Galwan issue and things like that, which we're only realizing now because the newspaper articles that have come out in the last 2 weeks show you the kind of support that they were willing to provide India with. Under Biden, you will get maybe at best verbal support. You won't get material support. So yes, Trump was better in that sense.
Okay. And just in closing, what do you think would be the new challenges facing the government vis-a-vis US relationships, and what would be your broad thing you would be hoping that the government does so that we have a good relationship going forward?
I think the best thing right now is, India has, first of all, never been the most important thing on the hill. India has always been a second or third tier state in terms of American interests. So it's mostly Netanyahu and Mohammed bin Salman who are going to get the bulk of the hate of the new Biden administration. And India is quite comfortable being that second-rate mediocrity that never gets taken seriously by anyone. So agar jo bhi hoga, thoda kam hoga, which also makes our path to rapprochement, I wouldn't say rapprochement, but managing our relations kind of easier. I think both sides are now willing to, just pretend certain things didn't happen and move forward.
But doesn't US needs India a lot right now with China as a bulwark against?
I've heard this argument several times. It is a joke of an argument.
Why do you say it's a joke? They do need India to balance out China. There is nobody else which can
balance out China. If your foreign minister isn't willing to name China after they kill 22 of your troops, what balancing are you going to do? Militarily, you're not willing to balance them. Militarily, you're not even willing to commit completely to interoperability. Militarily, even within your own navy, you are not willing to pursue the most cost-efficient way of this thing. You are pursuing airy-fairy dreams of aircraft carriers, which are essentially white elephants. You're not even, in your long-term fiscal planning of your military, you're not seeing this interoperability play through. You can at least argue that in terms of communication equipment, it's a fixable problem. Okay. But in terms of equipment, it is not a fixable problem, boss. You're looking at the next 20, 30 years without any serious interoperability. If you think the Americans are going to allow missiles, like Russian missiles like the BrahMos and Russian radars and things like that to get integrated into a Western Link 16 system, forget about it. It's not happening. Uh, and if you had sort of taken interoperability seriously, you would not have gone in for aircraft carriers or for a sea domination strategy. You would have gone in for a sea control strategy. You would have gone in for a sea denial strategy, which is what a fiscally smart country does against a much bigger, much richer neighbor. There are a lot of things. I'm specifically talking about the Navy because Navy is what you look at in terms of balancing. But even in terms of basic intelligence, you are much more focused on bringing them into our area, which is the Andaman and Nicobar and the Malacca Straits, than you are in taking the fight into the South China Sea. Okay. Now, America was very, very smart. America and the Soviet Union, they shared a border between Alaska and the Russian Far East, which is why, Sarah Palin, when she was asked what foreign policy experience do you have, she used to say, when I woke up in the morning, I could see Russia from my window. Hmm. Uh, uh, and remember, Alaska was Russian territory till
Yeah.
1870s. It
Mm.
was sold to America. Uh, but the tension was never in Alaska and the Bering Sea. The tension was always in Europe. America was very careful that agar nuclear weapons chalenge, Alaska mein nahi chalenge, Germany mein chalega. They were willing to fight to the last German, not to the last Alaskan. Okay. India's policy should be, we should be willing to fight to the last Indonesian, to the last Cambodian, to the last Singaporean, to the last Filipino, but not to the last Indian. We're not doing that. So there's lots of issues with this thing. Uh, Even in terms of economy, after what Narasimha Rao did, we became an important partner. But since then, you've not seen any serious reforms, nothing. It's just more regurgitation of old socialist trash over and over again. You're not really a star performer. People aren't talking about you in the terms that they used to. So तुम्हारा इकोनॉमी अगर इतना ये नहीं चल रहा है, अगर तुम्हारा मिलिट्री पॉलिसी इतना ये नहीं हो रहा है, what use are you to people? You can go on, say, I can, for example, I can go around screaming from every rooftop I'm the next Mukesh Ambani, boss. But unless I actually make the money and build an Antilla of my own, कौन मेरे को मुकेश अंबानी मानेगा? वो असली मुकेश अंबानी, मैं गंजा मुकेश अंबानी, गंजा मोटा मुकेश अंबानी. ठीक है, कोई नहीं मानेगा.
Uh, that is one perspective. But anyways, I will not get into the China debate with you because you always have a perspective which you would call realistic, and I personally say is overly pessimistic about India than it needs
Better.
to be.
So, I'll tell you why. It is better to be a pessimist and have your country pleasantly surprise you every now and then than to be an eternal optimist and have your country let you down every single time.
I would not agree with that because if you become too pessimistic, you stop working and believing that things can happen for the better. And sometimes pessimism becomes a self fulfilling cycle. So I
No,
would
I'll
go
tell you why.
optimism.
Pessimism makes for better policy because you always prepare for the worst and hope for the best. In India, we prepare for the best and we hope for the best.
So you want to go with only the paranoid survive? I believe the vigilant also will survive, not only the paranoid. And
Paranoid make better policy decisions. And not paranoid. I'm not paranoid about China. Remember, we've discussed this before. I've told you that India's greatest strategic asset is Xi Jinping. Biden may be compromised to China, but Xi Jinping is compromised to his own stupidity. Okay, China is perpetually hobbled by the fact that a man as stupid as Xi Jinping in terms of policy, who is the smartest man China has known in terms of internal politics. Remember, policy and internal politics. Xi Jinping is a genius in terms of internal politics. Nobody, not even Deng Xiaoping, acquired as much power as since Mao Zedong that Xi Jinping has. Probably even more than Mao Zedong, quite possibly. But in terms of policy, he's doing exactly what Brezhnev and Khrushchev did to the Soviet Union. He's laying the roots of its economic collapse. So I'm not that pessimistic also. For every, you asked me a certain slice of, इस पिज्जा का स्लाइस के बारे में तुमने पूछा जिसमें salami और mushroom थे. You didn't ask me about the slice of pizza that had the capsicum and the onion.
So I will end on your optimistic note because you have ended on China going to economic ruin. And next time I call you, I will have an optimistic session on why you think China is going for economic ruin. Because I am a person who likes to end on optimistic note, start on optimistic note, and beach में realistic बातें कर लेते हैं. So looking forward to a next conversation on the economic decline of China that you believe will happen. Thank you so much, Abhijit, for doing this.
माता कटोरी देवी की श्रेय.